Hi, everyone. I'm Tom Zimmerman from the EMDR podcast. I want to talk a little bit in this episode about flash-like approaches and clear up some misconceptions. Because many of the things that I heard about flash before I looked into it closely simply aren't true. And many of the things that we banter around, almost like this tennis ball that we bat back and forth across this net of misinformation and half information, is not very helpful in the service of our clients in this world's healing and recovery. We have remarkably few avenues that can help people rapidly, transformatively, and easily heal from severely wounding experiences. And this podcast is particularly for people who are working trauma therapists, people who get it, people who understand that what is wrong with us is all of this baggage that we carry, and that really deep liberation from the past is really the goal of what we've done. That the vast majority of stuff in the DSM that is not organic is the product of learning, and that product of learning is why many clients come and see us, and is really at the core of what we do when what we're doing well. One of the questions I want to address really directly is whether or not Flash is a resource or whether it is a way to fully and adaptively process and reprocess trauma. Or if it's something in the middle, is a resource here, kind of fully and adaptively reprocess trauma on the other end of some dichotomy. So what I hear over and over and over is that flash-like approaches are a resource. And what people will say is, I use this as a resource, I use this to take heat out of a memory, and then once the heat is out of a good chunk of the heat is out of the memory, then what we do is we'll use EMDR, I'll use some other, more proven effective trauma protocol to really get the distress down the rest of the way. And you can do that. However, what I would like you to consider is what you just said when you said that. What you just said is you just processed the distress down to a 2. And what we mean by that is that you've processed the distress down to a 2, and it's likely to stay at a 2. Does that make sense? So it's not like we used a container and made an 8 distress a 2 distress. In this argument that we've just made, that we process a memory down, we take a lot of the heat out of it so that we can really clean it out deeply with this other approach. In that is the admission of exactly what my argument is. So resources do not in and of themselves process trauma. Resources do not in and of themselves remove heat from memory. Resources can remove body-based distress. They can help us recontainer the trauma in the limbic brain. They can help us pivot away. They can help us pressure relief valve some of the distress in our body. But resources do not take awfulness out of a memory in and of themselves. They simply don't. So what we have here, at the very, very, very least, that even many of the people who, view and advocate flash-like approaches as a resource are quick to admit, is that there's something about this that changes the nature of the memory. If we have a lava-hot memory, we get it out, we load it into awareness, and then we purposefully use a container and container it. We can take a lot of heat out of that memory because what we've done in containering it is we've engaged in a kind of ritual that's going to get that memory back recontained in the limbic brain. But next Tuesday, when we interact with that memory, it's going to have a lot of heat in it. When you work with flash on that memory, it will not have a lot of heat in it if you do it well. Is it possible to do flash-like approaches very poorly? Absolutely. It's probable in this context that many of us are going to do flash-like approaches very, very poorly. Why? Because there's very little broad understanding about what the heck flash is. It's understood as this little technique you can do. And when it's demonstrated, it's often demonstrated blended with all kinds of other approaches, and it's not even entirely clear when you would use one versus when you would use another. I'm making the argument that flash isn't just a resource. It is a way, a potential way, to completely, permanently, and adaptively not just desensitize, but also reprocess memories. So let's think about, I think we need to be very clear about what we mean by reprocessing a memory. And really what I want to start with is talk about differences between traumatic memories and normal memories, because what reprocessing a memory means is making a traumatic memory more of a normal memory. So traumatic memories are easily triggered, right? We know this, and the triggering typically causes a catastrophe. A traumatic memory individually can profoundly shape the way you look at yourself in the world. When the memory plays, it feels like it's happening right here, right now. Because often traumatic memory and traumatic content is stored as raw sensory information. It's very difficult to get perspective on a traumatic memory. It's very difficult to see changes or alternatives in a traumatic memory. It is locked. It's locked up. Other people have used the metaphor of a zip file, and in that zip file is the raw sensory information. There's beliefs about the self and the world that are all shortcuts for survival. And in a very, very core way, because this, the limbic part of the brain and where this memory is stored and where this memory is re-experienced when we play it or when it plays, in a very fundamental way, the nervous system does not know that the memory's over. So that's traumatic memory, right? Traumatic memory content, as opposed to more normal memory content. Normal memory content is part of this large collection of things that have happened to you, that individually they do not profoundly shape identity or worldview. They don't often feel particularly vivid, and they don't contain much raw sensory information. In more normal memory, the memory, as much as anything, may be a story about what happened. It may be a story about the self and the self in the world. The memory, when it is reprocessed or when it is put into normal memory, it feels like it happened when it did. And it gets much of its meaning from the context, the organic context in which it's stored. It's easy to get perspective on it. It's easy to create art with it. It's easy to allow new interpretations to easily merge with it. And all parts of the nervous system are aware that that memory is over. They're not confused at all that that memory is over. And in EMDR, we have metrics for what that looks like. So how do we know when we've moved a lava-hot memory into normal memory space? There are three very basic checks, right? Number one, the SUDS is a 0 or neutral and stays 0 or neutral. The validity of the positive belief about the self is 7 out of 7 true, and we have a clear body scan when visiting the memory. We've probably also done other things like worked on future and present prong targets as well. But what you'll notice, even though this isn't kind of in the core, things we check when checking to see if a memory has been fully or adaptively processed in EMDR, these are things you can check and they'll work out and they'll be valid. The memory feels like it happened when it did. So when you play that memory, if it's a 20-year-old memory It will feel like a 20-year-old memory when that memory's been reprocessed. What that means is that the memory functions and behaves the same way it would have if you had been able to make sense of it at the time that it happened. So the memory fully and adaptively gets inserted into the timeline where it belongs. The client will tell you also that the memory feels over. On every channel, every part, the memory feels over. We also would expect that intrusive symptoms, drawing from the memory content, will just typically stop. This is trauma-related dreams, flashbacks, and the reprocessed memory. This is a really important thing that happens in EMDR, and we want to talk about what this may also look like in flash-like approaches. The reprocessed memory tends to generalize, meaning that you target one memory, clear that memory, and it may resolve dozens of adjacent or related memories. And these resolved memories become instantly adaptive information about the self and the world. Okay? So how does this look from a flash-like perspective when you do flash-like approach as well? It is exactly the same. There are several asterisks associated with that. One of those is we don't get the positive cognition right now whenever we do flash-like approaches. That's not part of the script, not part of any script I'm aware of, to get positive cognitions and their validities. However, I make a habit of checking. Every time we clear a memory with flash, I ask the client, what is it that you believe about yourself, with a little bit more ease than you did, 15 minutes ago or whenever we started to work on this memory. And very often there's a positive belief that they believe very, very strongly, that they did not believe just a handful of moments before. I also have seen that memories, when we take a flash-like approach, memory generalization does occur. I do not know if it's as broad and comprehensive as generalization occurs in EMDR, but I have plenty evidence from my clients, from my targeting sequence plans with them, that generalization to some degree is occurring. But every other metric, that memory getting moved into the timeline, that memory having a SUDS a 0 and staying a 0, that memory feeling like it happened when it did, that memory being resolved and showing up instantly as adaptive information about the self and the world, intrusive symptoms stopping, all of these things occur in flash-like approaches when you do them well. So again, this is not a resource. This is not a resource by any stretch of the imagination that we would consider something a resource. So if we're going to keep saying that flash is a resource, we need another adjective to describe that, right? We need some other qualifier, because if it is a resource, then it is some type of superhero resource.